we're going to get started. We have kind of a panel for you guys today. That's going to be a pretty broad topic. I saw the title to the presentation, and it's The Wide World of HVACR, New Motivations, EPA Regulations, Mapping the Path Forward. It's pretty broad. But we're going to cover some topics that we think are pretty interesting. We're also going to open it up a little bit later for some question and answers as well. So I hope you guys come up with some pretty great questions to ask our panel. We've acquired a lot of experts here today to kind of give some insight. I will say there's no crystal balls. There's no definite answers. We hope to untangle the mystery that is a lot of these regulatory stuff coming down the pipeline. But again, we're going to do our best to give our insight. My name is Colleen Keyworth. I do many different things in the industry. I'm absolutely obsessed with the HVAC industry, but my main job is I do the director of sales and marketing for a web marketing company called Online Access. I've been in this industry for 15 years now. I am former president of Women HVACR, immediate past president for the International Network of Women in Cooling underneath the United Nations Environmental Program. Lots of different fun things that are absolutely taking up all of my time that I cannot seem to let go of. But Women in HVACR being one of the probably, I guess, most well-known 10 years of my life. But going forward, though, I got the opportunity to be the moderator today for you guys for this panel, and I'm pretty excited to introduce our guests for today. So we have with us today, we have in order, because they chose their order, we have Aaron Lewis with Johnson Controls. We have Karen Meyers with Rheem Manufacturing. We have Rick Rodriguez with Siemens. And we have Troy Harvey with PassiveLogic. Each of them are actually going to get an opportunity in order to give a little bit about themselves, how many years they've been in the industry, and what their roles are. Starting with Aaron.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, Aaron Lewis with Johnson Controls. I've been in the industry for 25 years. I really came up actually as a family business, so it's really my whole life I've been doing it. But through that, so I've been with multiple manufacturers, building solutions through fire, security, control, service, and most recently equipment. So I lead the HVAC equipment business for North America for Johnson Controls, essentially the York and JCI brands. And I'm also the Global Data Center Solutions Commercial Officer.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Karen Meyers. I've been in the industry for 40 years. I always qualify that statement that I started when I was 5 years old, so keep that in mind. Again, with Rheem Manufacturing, I've worn many hats there. I started out focusing on air conditioning and doing everything from pricing and leading our product team, and then getting into the ops side, leading forecasting and demand planning. But now I work for all sides of Rheem, which includes water heating and commercial refrigeration, and I lead the government affairs function there. So, which for Rheem, government affairs is regulatory, legislative, policy, and other such things like that. So very happy to be here.
Good afternoon, Rick Rodriguez with Siemens. I've been in the industry for 34 years, just like you said. I was the Doogie Howser of
Yes.
HVAC when I started at 10. But I've been with Siemens for about 20 years. My roles throughout my career have primarily focused in the areas of energy efficiency, energy engineer in my past life, sales management. Today I'm responsible for our sustainability and energy performance services business for the U.S., where we work with our customers in helping them upgrade their infrastructure, ready their buildings for the future.
And I'm Troy Harvey with PassiveLogic. I'm the CEO. You might know us as the innovator in this space. My personal story is I'm a product designer and AI engineer, and really saw the opportunities. I came into this industry about a decade ago and said, wow, we got to reinvent how all this is working, because it's holding back our ability to get buildings to where they need to go. And so, we've really been focusing on fully autonomous buildings, the digital twins that power those buildings, and how do we make an end-to-end workflow of software that works and collaborates between you and your other teams, as well as you and the building, and making the building part of the collaborative team.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Now we got the hard part. We got the questions. So we came up with a few questions. Like I said earlier, guys, be sure to come up with some of your own. We're going to have some time for some Q&A. So we're going to start with Karen. Ladies first. We have a quick overview of changes taking effect now. What expectations lie ahead for the year?
So there's the big one that's really taking effect in 2025 is the change to low GWP refrigerants. So all of you in this room probably know that beginning in 2025, it was mandated that we go to refrigerants that have a GWP less than 700. So that's the big one that's taking effect today. The other thing, as I'm sure you all know, is there was an election and we have a new administration in 2025. So as all new administrations do, when they come into office, they pause all existing rules that were not final within 60 days prior to them taking effect. They're doing a review of all of those rules, so we'll see where all of that lands. There could be some changes in what we thought was going to happen. There's other changes that have happened with the new administration, such as executive orders that have pulled us out of the Paris Agreement, et cetera. So I would say there's for 2025, some things that we thought were going to go one way may get some course correction, if you will, and go a different direction, but it's still a lot TBD on some of the things that we originally thought and had planned for 2025.
Anybody have a follow-up on that Karen didn't cover? I think she kind of got it. All right. Another one we have for getting into with those changes, what incentive programs are available to support compliance with regulations while promoting energy efficiency and sustainability that haven't, been affected or that are new? And this one's for Rick.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things that we look as really a key driver in the industry is around tax credits with 179D, with the Inflation Reduction Act, putting some bonuses and extra dollars in there. We're starting to see a lot of traction in terms of that being used to, not only reduce energy consumption, but drive investment in buildings, allowing us to do larger capital expenditures and getting incentives back. We talked a little bit about the impact of the new administration. We are hopeful that 179D will continue to be have that incentive, and we think the tax deductions or the tax changes will be a little more slice and dice, not full repealment. And so far, we see a lot of Republican support to keep 179D in place. So for us, I think that's really one of the key drivers. The other part, we talk about the environmental aspects and the changes to refrigerants. I think will continue to have an impact on what happens. And then, seeing a lot of traction around heat pumps and seeing some of the various agencies supporting heat pump technology is starting to gain traction again. So we saw a lot of that even in the show here this week with that type of technology. So again, a lot of unknowns with what's going to happen from a regulation standpoint, but still feel really good that there's some things there that are going to drive, continue to drive sustainability, energy efficiency, resiliency.
I'm kind of curious to hear from the rest of the panel. It's, when we deal as a player, it's like bringing a new technology to space. A lot of our customers and the contracts that we're signing are at like whole portfolio level REITs. And I'm finding that less regulatory as much as the businesses, these corporations, they have stronger internal drivers than the government drivers, right? And those drivers are going to be generally international, where you have international REITs that have buildings all over. They're not going to do things differently. They're going to have a singular corporate policy, and where you have maybe in Europe, you might have like building automation drivers like the EPBD, or from just a pure like whether or not like politics in the U.S. finds the word ESG tenable. If you're a REIT and you're taking money from the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, you're going to take it seriously. So it doesn't really matter what the administration here says or not says. It's not going to change, like for a lot of the corporate drivers, like what they have to do to get investors to buy buildings to run them. And I'm kind of curious from your perspectives, like how you guys see it from the regulatory side of that driver between like corporate policy versus government. When you see ups and downs of government factors, the corporate policies can't be as as much chaos as the government may choose to be, right? It's not good governance.
Yeah, and what I've seen there, and you're right, European-owned companies continue to drive your efforts around sustainability and decarbonization. Siemens, which has our own program, and we continue to drive decarbonization, electrification on our facilities, changed our payback requirements, right? Increased them so you can get more done. Now, we still rely on Inflation Reduction Act for tax incentives and other mechanisms to help fund those ventures. But I believe you are right. You see European companies continue to drive. Our fear a little bit is the US-based companies, as they start to follow what the administration is putting forward, will they cut back on some of those ESG targets? Will they cut back on the idea of energy efficiency? But I think the switch will be more around resiliency, cost savings. So I think it's just a shift as to how you position the work you're going to do inside buildings.
This summer when I was with a bunch of REIT CEOs, they said to me, here in the US, and this was multifamily, they said 40% of our investors come from Europe. So we can't, it's not a US policy, it's investor driven. And I would care, have you guys run into that, that dynamic?
So it's a little of all of the above, right? So what's going to happen in the commercial space is going to be a little bit different than what happens in the everyday residential space. And you do need regulatory drivers to make a lot of these changes actually materialize. So as I look at what our businesses are doing to comply in Europe versus what we're doing here, there's some similarities in all of it, right? It's not like black and white different, but what gets on first base versus what's up to bat, those things will kind of ebb and flow to fit what the market dynamics are of the country that you're working in.
Yeah, Troy, I live this very often. So in the global data center space, it does get very, very interesting, right? Because there's different levels of corporate responsibility. Everybody put out 2030 dates, right, that they want to hit certain landmarks by. You've seen those get pushed out just because of the differences in demand that we're seeing in a lot of cases. And it does get away from just the refrigerants, right? That was kind of the low-hanging fruit. Everyone wanted a low or ultra-low GWP refrigerant. But when you change those, right, you inherently have a less efficient refrigerant, which means more steel, more copper, more aluminum, right? Bigger machines, more freight, larger freight, more building energy. Steel, all these things. So when you think about, I tend to think about it outside of just the refrigerant, the regulations, but the overall sustainability of the build and how our equipment fits into the building. And I'm getting those questions more and more. Now, I'll tell you the challenge is when you think about the corporations that are coming to us with their sustainability goals, the gap today is the folks that are laying out the goals and feeding them down through organization, through design, very often don't make it all the way to procurement, right? Where capital expense is still winning.
Yeah, makes sense.
Actually, building on what you were talking about, Aaron, so with those changes, thinking about innovation and product design, how are manufacturers preparing for potential regulatory changes? What's the effect on the product? And you kind of already mentioned this a little bit. What's the effect on the cost and the life cycle of the product?
Right. Yeah. It's all those things because it's the end application, but also what that customer is requiring. So when you just starting at the refrigerants and working your way backward, whether we were at 410A in residential light commercial products or 134A for applied product. And we had to make a change very quickly to things like 513, 514, 1234ZE, the A2L component of that's lightly flammable. Is that going to be acceptable by building codes? So the business and the industry moves faster than those codes do at some points. So we have to be prepared and flexible, and basically use standard platforms that can flex to each one of those depending on what those code requirements are or the customer requirements. But it's required a significant amount of, I'll say, engineering agility.
A lot of adjustments from the distributors too, as far as storage capacity. I mean, it affects everything.
Absolutely, and training, right? With all those refrigerants, even our own factories, we have to segment the refrigerants. You need to train those people that are working that section in each place. It's all roped off differently, so it's transported differently, right? You need different stickers to move it across state lines. All those things are complicating factors that have been amplified because we need more choices today than we had yesterday.
Doesn't it always seem like the decision seems easy? It's the execution that makes it complicated.
That's absolutely right.
And I don't think it's stopping. I think it's going to continue to move forward. We see what New York's doing. to try and come up with something different than what the EPA recently finalized in their AIM Act regulations. And so a lot of this is continuing to change, and we know Canada has not harmonized with the US, so if you're a manufacturer primarily based in North America, you're doing something different for Canada than you are for the US, and then Europe is moving sometimes at a very, they were all into heat pumps, and then they backed off of heat pumps, and now maybe they're going back, so it's just, and the refrigerants are continuing to change, and new fluids are continuing to be introduced. So it's going to be it's good that you love the HVACR industry, because it's not going to be dull over the next several years.
It doesn't hurt that it's super lucrative either. So. Troy, so you had already kind of touched on this a little bit, but I just kind of saw this question and kind of fit into this. So is there a means of predictability for regulatory shifts? So for instance, what resources are available throughout the channel so that people can kind of stay ahead of what's next? And I know from my limited experience that a lot of it, like you said, is more of a worldwide thing than just what we're doing here locally. And you can kind of watch what's happening. So I know you can probably expand on that.
Yeah, I think, so as a company, we were really founded on these ideas of how do we affect change in climate, right? Like if you look at climate, there's been a lot of energy out there, people energy, regulatory energy around vehicles and transportation. But let's take into account that buildings are like 45% of all energy, right? That's almost double that of all transportation. And by the DOE's own numbers, if we just controlled what we already have, this isn't big retrofits, this isn't like huge changes to the building, new equipment, just controlled what we already had accurately and commissioned it, we'd save 40% of that. So you take those two numbers, that's equivalent to not turning gas cars into electric. That's equivalent to wiping all transportation off the planet in terms of climate and carbon. Right, so that's the opportunity. And what we said to ourselves is like, while we're a bunch of efficiency nerds and AI nerds, we said, well, how do we align these incentives with business first principles of why do people want to do this in the first place? Because I think a lot of this is driven by artificial means, right? Like we want to do things that are more expensive, but then that costs money, and then we have to get the capital, and can we get people aligned? Can we get incentives in place? And we said, well, what if we just rethought the whole stack? What if we made it so that in the first place, say automation in our case, was cheaper and easier to do than it would be conventionally? And you got climate, you got efficiency, and all the regulatory for free, right? Like that's a different equation than most of the time we're saying, pay me more money and I will give you X benefit in terms of regulation or ROI or whatever later. What if instead, as an industry, we took this on backwards and we said, I'm just gonna make the product, the experience, everything better for you. The first day you get your ROI, because it's just better, faster, cheaper. And we just give away energy efficiency, we give climate, we give regulation away for free. And then we're not so incentive driven, right? And I think that's possible in a lot of different industries in a way that we approach the work we do. But it sometimes takes, let's flip the script, let's reinvent how we're going about it.
So what would you recommend that anybody in the audience keep track of or to stay abreast of in order to kind of keep abreast of what's going on with the changes?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess my point is if you do it from a if you do it from a technology direction, you're getting out in front of it naturally instead of having to artificially, I'm gonna go boot up a whole team to go watch these things so then we change our behavior, as opposed to, why don't we adopt technologies that get out in front of all of these things, right? But it's on us as technology providers to go do that for people, that those technologies enables them. They don't have to think about the regulations. It's going to happen for free.
I will say that that most of the agencies, at least in the US and Canada, they do publish regulatory agendas. So you can go and look and see, okay, here's the rules that they're going to be working on over the next, like for instance, DOE publishes a spring regulatory agenda and a fall regulatory agenda. So keeping up with what's going to be coming, what they're working on and what they're going to be publishing proposed rules on is pretty easy from an appliance standards program. But also, because the pace of change is so incredibly fast now, and again, I've been in this industry for decades and I have never seen it quite like this, I think it's really important that you partner with suppliers or manufacturers or distributors who are really in tune to this. I know just from Rheem's perspective, the way we communicate all the regulatory changes has vastly changed over the last 12 to 24 months. We're doing customer town halls, we're sending out newsletters dedicated totally to what the regulatory changes are, just to make sure that our customers are well aware of what's coming up. And so, and you know, also we're soliciting a lot of these regulations. They, you know, used to, it was just the OEMs that were providing input. You know, now we're actually soliciting a lot of input from the people that this is, you know, really going to affect. These are the people that are going to be, you know, and making our comments much more thoughtful, because at the end of the day, it's the contractor or the plumber or someone who's going to be forced with installing these products and understanding what some of their pain points might be, and figuring out, you know, ways we can innovate around those.
To reflect what you said, I know that in 2022, when you guys had your conference, you guys did such a great job really putting it out there for your customers. What's going on with SEER2? What's going on with new equipment stuff? I mean, we've seen the whole industry shift into, we have to educate because these contractors are going to need to know what's going on.
Right.
And it's been the responsibility of manufacturers such as yourself. So it's been huge. So I'm going to go to Rick, and then Karen's going to follow up, because this question you guys both kind of choose, but I'm going to merge them together. So looking ahead, what are the most prominent or promising sustainable technologies currently being integrated, and what are you seeing in the next 3 to 5 years that are going to be put into effect?
Yeah.
So we're going to start with Rick and then Karen.
Yeah, I think the resurgence of the heat pump is, I think, a pleasant surprise, and now we're seeing how well they're working in colder climates and what we can do there. To me, that's really starting to gain a lot of traction, and even geothermal is really starting to have a resurgence now. Especially in the Northeast, we're starting to see a lot of people asking more about what can we do with geothermal heat pumps and those types of things. So to me, that's a couple of the big swing opportunities that I see when it comes to the influence on product. I did want to just hit on one comment from the last question, though. What we're also seeing is a lot of cities starting, even doubling down on some of their requirements in buildings for efficiency, and so that's starting to have a bigger impact as well. But as far as other technologies, you know, I mentioned the geothermal piece. I think we'll continue. We're starting to see potentially could renewables be integrated into HVAC as well, whether that's solar for heating and hot water. Will that make a resurgence? Hard to really tell. You know, will things like thermal storage start to make a comeback? I guess a lot of that will depend on pricing and what's going on in the energy space. But, you know, we're kind of just going back to the old. It's not necessarily new. Energy heat recovery, right? See a lot of that starting to pop back up again. So I think it's just innovating on the old again, not necessarily brand new innovations.
Yeah, well, we know that we have a lot of new standards coming. We're going to have new commercial water heating efficiency standards that become effective in 2026, new gas furnace minimum efficiency standards in 2028, along with new residential water heater standards in 2028, and then commercial HVAC in 2029. We're seeing a lot of other things, though, outside the federal level happen in regional areas. So we've got certain areas in California that are going to be requiring zero NOx emission standards, and we're seeing a lot of states, I think 5 states so far, have implemented what are called EPR laws, extended producer responsibility laws, which are all about the packaging of your products. I know 7 states have already introduced similar legislation so far in 2025, so there's a lot coming from from that end, and then when it comes to refrigerants, it's kind of a race to the bottom at this point. Everyone looking at different low GWP refrigerants, and then how can you update the building codes to so that a lot of those products can be installed.
Mm-hmm.
I would just double down on what Rick said too. So if you guys didn't hear that, I'm going to say the word heat pump over and over again, and heat recovery. Being able to capture and utilize waste heat is critical to everything we're doing, right? Everything around decarbonization and electrification, which you see it coming through the industries. I mean, healthcare is a very easy place to see it, where you need hot water all year long, the larger scale heat pumps. Now to a place where the technology has gotten to a place where it's less expensive to provide hot temperatures up to 180 degrees in heat pumps, which really wasn't there before. But on a grand scale too, so not just the residential and light commercial and even applied markets. The other industries I'm in, data centers, semiconductors, EV battery plants, all using some form of heat recovery now to make sure that they can use that heat in other places instead of letting it be wasted. So I would say continue to double down on the heat recovery, double down on the heat pumps. Of course, as we stress the electrical grids, we're also starting to question where all the electricity is going to come from. Also, great reading material, whether that's grids. You're seeing people move throughout the country to different locations. Great things coming up around fuel cells, natural gas, and will lead you to kind of a rabbit hole of nuclear power too, which is really interesting stuff. So as you dig into the decarbonization and the electrification, you're going to start at the heat pumps and kind of get through all of those kind of segments, which is going to lead you. I would say that's when I think about what the future looks like, that's kind of giving me the roadmap of where we need to go from both products, services, and where eventually the regulations will end up for us.
Well, you kind of already answered your question. Just expanding upon what you just answered there, what do you see as far as controls on the control side, though? Is there any?
Yeah, that's a great point. So we were talking about that a little bit earlier. I think first it's the realization that you should have controls on everything, right? Because the very first, it seems very basic, but I've had the question before of why can't I just, for that amount of money, I can hire someone to flip a switch all day, right? And you probably can do that, but it's never going to be optimal. It's never going to be efficient.
It's never going to be efficient.
But it really is the money maker is in the interaction between those systems and being able to understand how each segment of the system is going to interact together to provide the optimal output. Right, and as these systems get bigger, I'll say the variables are getting more and more complex. So integrating things like AI into our algorithms and into standard controllers that can make decisions for you, as opposed to having to program them all separately, is going to be a huge part of where we go.
And this leads into Troy's question. I was going to say you're going to.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think you hit on the big story, right? That let's take out for a moment AI and how you do it. The biggest problem in buildings today is that you have lots and lots and lots of systems that are either individually controlled, as you're mentioning. I just got back from walking a bunch of buildings in Germany. Holy cow, we're doing it bad, they're doing it worse. There's this like open loop, like the number of radiators in Germany alone, millions of them, that just have this thermostatic radiator valve. There's like no actual control. It's like totally open loop buildings. And then there's like this cultural pattern of opening the windows in the middle of the wintertime that their grandmas all told you to open the window in the wintertime. Our grandmas are all like, what are you doing, opening the windows in the wintertime? But the key here, and I think that people don't often grok this because we're sometimes limited by the lens of the tools we've been given. There is more control opportunity between all your individual control loops than there is in the control loops, right? Like if I have two systems that have a control loop, whatever that is, PID or like some algorithmic control, or just on-off thermostatics, right? The interaction of three systems is not 3 times that control complexity. It's more like 3 to the 10th power of the control complexity. And we don't even see it today because our controls are so dumb. Even if you have a BMS, even if you have $1 million BMS, that's just digitally emulating 1920s technology, right? Like at scale. We have a long ways to go of how do we control this in coordination. Buildings are a systems of systems problem. And when I hire engineers like from other industries, I'm often telling them, like, autonomous vehicle industry, they're like HVAC. And I'm like, Give me 30 minutes. And then by the end of 30 minutes, they now understand that this is the most interesting, most complex robotics problem there is in the world, because a building like this has 10 to 50,000 points, right? An autonomous vehicle has like 50 sensors, that's 50 points, 3 outputs, steering, brake, and acceleration. That's not very complex. A building's a way cooler robotics problem, but that also represents why they're not being controlled very well and why there's efficiencies issues. Because no matter how smart your engineers are, they're just not going to solve that combinatorics problem. You need another level of control technology to actually solve what we have today, right? And so that's one of the things that we're really focused on, is like, how do you bring all of that together? Whether it's your heat pumps, which bring a whole new level of control problems, right? Mm-hmm. Because yeah, it gets a 500 cop or 500%, 5 cop in the field or in a laboratory environment. In the field, you see those same things getting a 2.7, right? Why is that? Well, the control problem became a lot more complicated, because at stage 1, it's 5. At stage 2, it's 3. Stage 3, you went to resistance heat, right? And almost all the controls are getting that wrong. It's a really complex algorithm of interactions with the rest of the systems, the climate, the occupancy of that day, not just you can do it statically once and it's going to happen the same way every day. So these things all come together of how do we control the buildings as a complete whole, right?
All right, this one's a curveball. I think you guys are ready for it. But as far as we've talked about stuff from the top down, and as far as some of the stuff coming down and making changes on it, as far as a consumer drive, though, for trends for residential, trends for commercial, things that consumers are demanding as far as functionality, being integrated with AI, any of that kind of stuff. And I can open this up, and whoever can grab it first, but I will call on you. What are you guys seeing as far as what are consumer needs changing in response to some of this, or even, as far as, being proactive on some of this, that people are making changes and actually getting their voice heard on it?
Yeah, I might, just follow up on that same piece. As we do some of these large REIT deals, right? And we were talking about in some cases they're multi-continental. So a lot of the time it's internal ESG programs, right? They have to meet their governance, and that means that they have to do something organization-wide to all their buildings to meet their own goals. Right, so that's driving up from the top, from this is what we have to do as a whole portfolio. In some cases, it's these regulatory drivers, and we've talked a bit about those. In some cases, it's a re-recognition, and I think this is something that after spending a bunch of times in private with these business leaders on the building side, that I'd like to project that forward to you, is they're in the midst of a transition. And it's not just like something simple to put quotes around, a digital transition. The real estate industry is going through a transition from an asset industry, these are just finance guys who are like, buildings are finance lines on a spreadsheet, to buildings as products with customers that are tenants that need services, and it is the biggest opportunity for digitization in the world. And we just have even barely started that. And so those are like, that's an opportunity. How does that finance lens, or that how do we run business lens, come back down to the things we're talking about? It changes what are the entry points for how you enable these new efficiency initiatives, because they can sneak in with a larger technology initiative to facilitate the digitization of that building, that at the same time you can accomplish efficiency. At the same time, you can meet these regulatory goals, because they all stack together. Like, they're all making a building smarter together. And I think that's one of the biggest drivers that we see today, is this transition that's happening in the real estate industry, and what is the technology that flows, and then how do you simultaneously solve these regulatory and efficiency and climate issues all in one go.
Yeah. I'm gonna pick on you, Aaron.
Yeah, I'll take it in another direction, because, he said it so much more eloquently than I would have. But one of the things that I get from our customers now, and I'm trying to solve globally, when you think about the sustainability side, is where you manufacture things, how far you have to ship them, what does it take to get from point A to point B. So there's a real driver when you think about who the consumers are and who's purchasing things around localized manufacturing. So how do you bring the products closer to where they're going to be used at the end of the day? I think that's probably a problem for all of us. For example, we have 38 global manufacturing sites around the world. Each one of them provides a different product. Some of them provide the same product. But being able to, go back to the agility I spoke about earlier in design, it's really being able to flex from a manufacturing perspective too and hit demands. Those demands are moving geographically very quickly too. So I think the largest problem I'm trying to solve from a consumer perspective is how do I bring the products closer to the end user so that once they're produced, we don't have to move them and transport them and put them on boats, fly them overseas, and driving up a carbon footprint that might be unnecessary.
So Troy and Aaron both brought up stuff as far as equipment design with consumer-led, thoughts being in the lead. As far as for you two, though, what would you think as far as any regulatory? Is there any consideration to any consumer drive and what they're looking for in residential and commercial into consideration in any of the regulatory? I know that's a weird question, but it's just kind of something, it feels like we're kind of force-fed quite a bit, and then you're just expected to adapt. So,
Well, I'll take the residential side,
Okay.
and you can take the commercial side. I think and you still have to take the residential side, and you kind of have to split it between replacement and new construction, because it's a different conversation, it's a different opportunity. When you're looking at replacing a 20-year-old piece of equipment, you've got some limitations in many cases on what you can actually put in that space without having to do some, major modifications to where the existing equipment. So you've got to understand that, and you've got to understand, are you replacing just a component, or are you replacing the entire system, which can get pretty pricey. And if I look at, what was the commonly installed 20 years ago, and I'm replacing that system now, it's not a cheap thing to do. So there's a lot of, so I think the best thing you can do is make sure your contractors are well trained on the many, many options. I look at how many different combinations of residential equipment that we certify, and it's hundreds of thousands of putting, a 3-ton unit with a, 4-ton coil, or whatever you may need, depending upon what country. And the right answer for Miami is not going to be the right answer for Michigan, because it's completely different. So I think it's there is so much training because of all these changes, and the contractor being knowledgeable of what's going to work best for his customers. If you're serving, if your customer base is middle to low income, or if it's high income, there's so many choices out there, and there's so many different levels of options that you can get on this equipment. It's very, very dependent. If you're a home builder, then your possibilities open up a lot more, because you can design the home to meet a lot of different criteria. So, at the end of the day, from a residential perspective, having a well-informed contractor who knows about all these available options is the best thing that you can provide a consumer, because he can guide them the best on what will work for their application.
And to take that a step further, when we talk about the commercial market, we hear the term green. Well, really the green that matters is money. First cost tends to be the driver. So, there's plenty of products and information out there on what you should install, but what ends up getting installed in a lot of cases is the decision because it's the lowest price. Mm-hmm. And that results in a higher cost of operation. And the other piece that I think we forget about all of this, whether it's residential, commercial, heat pump product, is ongoing service. If you don't service the products, per the recommendations of the manufacturer, they're going to lose efficiency. They're not going to operate as well. You're going to lose life expectancy out of the equipment. So that can be a bigger part of the equation. I know, Troy, you talked about life cycle a little bit and commissioning. And, if you're not maintaining your equipment, your costs are going to go up. Your equipment life's going to go down. You're going to end up having to replace sooner and end up with higher operating costs. So ultimately, that point about education, looking at the economics, the life cycle. It may cost you more up front. You'll save it over time, but if you don't maintain it, you're going to lose the savings and be a loser twice.
All right, we're going to go back to buildings because you talked about that a little bit, Troy, and then I need you to follow up on this one, Aaron. And I have one more question after that, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience. So, what considerations are being discussed in equipment design based on buildings, though, with architecture in mind? You'd kind of brushed on that a little bit, but multifamily units, different types of trends that you're seeing.
Yep. So I want to focus a little bit more on flipping the script, because I think whenever we put ourselves behind regulation, we're trailing, we're not leading. And I'll take an example on this on how you can flip the script. So there was a company that launched about 5 years ago called SmartRent. Now, what I thought was really interesting about SmartRent is that prior to this, in apartments, it was hard to get an apartment owner to spend more than $29 on a thermostat. They convinced every apartment owner to put basically a platform that's around $1,000 per unit in every apartment. And it was not a very complex device. It was brought together like 3 or 4 IoT devices. And through a platform like this, you had thermostat control, but now you gave the owner-operator some controls around their building. And it turned out like there was a side effect that was unexpected. The most valuable thing was now you could have potential tenants show up to the doorbell, which was an IoT device, show their license, be automatically let in remotely into the building and show themselves around a potential apartment. This got rid of huge amounts of inefficiencies around their real estate agent brokering process. And that was worth all that money times, many X. But what you snuck in was an energy management platform at the same time, right? So here's how you can kind of flip the script on, let's not like be drawn into the future, right? Like let's make our own future and then make it valuable so that people naturally want to buy that, and you sneak in the energy efficiency whether they want it or not. And so we see this a lot in our company as like a key driver. Our goal is you get climate whether or not you care, right? And I'm going to deliver you the fastest BMS from initial ideation through commissioning and deployment by several X that you're going to be like, I won, right? I won. It was more efficient. It was cheaper. It was better in every single way to get in the door for no more cost. And oh yeah, do you want climate, right? So I think from us on a product perspective, again, it's on us as an industry to like, how do we take you guys as our audience, as our customers, and say, how do we make your life better? And then give you the tools you need, like it's the free side effect of your business, right? Like your business is key to us. You have customers yourself, and those customers should get then the outcomes of what makes your businesses better.
So Aaron, what are some of the trends in product design that are affected by architecture?
Yeah, I love where you're going with that. So where my mind was going was there are things where we are ahead of legislation. Right? And we're trying to drive the business forward. We're trying to drive forward for our customers, sustainability, energy efficiency, savings, all those things. One of the things I lean on for that is free cooling, right? On its face, free cooling for all of us seems like a great thing. If you're in a temperate climate where you can utilize it, the problem is it's not free. Right? At the end of the day, free cooling requires some type of heat exchanger. It requires a set of pumps. You still have to pump things through the system. And there's regulations. California specifically has Title 24. Europe, this is huge right now, where all the chillers require some type of free cooling coil associated with them. Now, that was all written before we had mag-bearing technology in chillers. So today, the chillers are more efficient at low loads, more efficient than actually driving pumps through a free cooling heat exchanger, right? But if we stick to what's legislated today, we have to spend more money. We have to put a heat exchanger there, a full pump system, a control system that goes with it. The chiller is much bigger. It might weigh 10, 20,000 pounds more because you have more coils. You put more copper, more aluminum, more steel into it, right? So we provide a less sustainable solution because the legislation says we need free cooling.
Well, I think on that point, and there might be people in the audience that help drive the ASHRAE, guidelines, and those often are part of how we get to legislation, and we need to be cautious. Are we leaving ourselves enough flexibility for our own technological future, or are we baking in prescriptions that are maybe worse than other potential outcomes that, as these projects, as you take on a new ASHRAE set of guidelines, those can be 5-10 year projects. By the time you're done, they're likely outmoded, right? So we have to be thoughtful about that.
Excellent point.
All right, final question. So how can building owners of these different facilities and managers optimize their systems to reduce energy costs and consumption? And Rick, that one's you, and Karen, if you had a follow-up to that.
Yeah, I think the number one thing is knowing what you're consuming, right? Getting the information, knowing your data, and benchmarking. So whether it's with Energy Star or benchmarking against other buildings, how is my building performing from an energy efficiency standpoint? I think that's really number one. And from there, there's lots of different things you can do. One, we talked about just controlling and optimizing your systems, whether that's getting an energy audit or an energy assessment done, recommissioning on a regular basis of your HVAC systems always uncovers problems and fixes that need to be made. Proper maintenance will help you reduce energy costs. And then just knowing your building, having the ability to not just rely on data, but to know your building. One of the things I've seen is, you look at your BMS and it tells you can't cool a space. Just won't keep it cool. Well, you finally go to the space and find out somebody put the pop machine in front of the thermostat, right? So you got to have the ability to know your buildings, get in, counteract that with the data so that you're ultimately controlling your building the right way.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know that I have much to add, but it's not just the equipment, but it's everything about that building. If you have a vent disconnected from an air register, if you don't understand everything else
Insulation.
that's delivering that air, so it's not just about the equipment, it's about all the delivery of the air and other things that help make that building comfortable or not.
Well, it kind of leads back into education again, because again, everybody thinks I'm sure you all have contractors that always install perfectly every time.
Yeah, one of the things too is operations.
Sure.
I think we're faced with great retirement when it comes to the people that operate buildings, and we're not seeing as many people coming up in that industry. So we are going to start to have to rely more on control systems to run our buildings, and with that becomes some challenges because your staff then doesn't know the systems as well as they used to. So I think balancing those two are really going to be key in the future.
And that's where, I think where we start building this future, like the things that we're really interested in about autonomous buildings, like why I mentioned at the beginning of an autonomous building being part of the team, right? Not just enabling team collaboration, but your building and your teams collaborating, where your building can actually tell you these things because it knows what's going on inside of it, it understands itself. When I hired one of my VPs from the tech industry, and he was doing his first week of onboarding, and he finally realized that in our industry that a big $1 million BMS install, there's nowhere in that $1 million that knows anything about a building. It's just a bunch of static controls that we've handwritten. It just blew his mind that that's the state of this industry, right? And so we really need to change that so that buildings are self-aware of what's going on, what am I controlling, why am I controlling, how am I controlling, and then you're not relying on the man in the middle, right? That we have fewer and fewer of those people who are sitting in the building, sitting in the boiler room that you can actually call upon. And that's really crucial for how we're going to actually scale this industry and maintain our buildings in the future. We just don't have the talent, and that's not just a US problem. Around the world, they have the same challenges. In Europe, you have people aging out of these roles. In places like Japan, you have people aging out, and there are no immigrants. We have this whole immigrant thing in this country right now that's this thing. Who has the most immigrants wins. That's the rules of economy. It's a pyramid game of people, and countries that are experiencing the lack of immigrants are already suffering in really challenging ways, right? And so we're going to need automation to help support and supplant, but it's not going to go without like some technology to help facilitate.
The other thing I would tell you, just to add, I think we're underutilizing today is the ability to connect all the buildings, right? Having remote operating centers, they're much less expensive and much more available than they were before, where that data is hosted off-site and you have people continually looking at it for you, can reduce the amount of expertise you need sitting in each individual building. But I don't think that gets advertised the way it should. I think there's opportunity there to educate the folks in the field, but also just expand and scale them through a digital means as opposed to actually having to train each individual person.
All right, we have hit the last 10 minutes before we get to the final end. Was there any questions from the audience? There is a mic right there. I can have it run to you. Haley, can you grab that real quick? All right, here in the front. She's gonna get it. She'll run. She'll run eventually. Okay, I'm not the only one whose feet hurt, right? Because like
Up here.
up here, Haley.
I'm a contractor, a small contractor, but I still deal with commercial buildings. And when they build a brand new building, we have to bring it up to code. So it's a pretty efficient building. But we have a lot of old buildings in this country. And my experience has been the ownership of that has no idea about efficiency or anything. It's like pulling teeth to get them to do anything. So you have this huge, there's probably a lot of more old buildings than there are new ones, right?
That's right.
There's just tons of them, and they're all grandfathered in. And what the catch is, if you touch that HVAC system, it's got to be brought up to code.
Sure.
They don't want to do it. So how do we incentivize? Do we make government regulation that you have to bring up your building to code? With some owners, that's the only way it's going to happen. Or do you give them money to do it? What do you do?
That's a great question. I don't know if somebody else wants to chime in on the regulations. I can give you what my perspective. I think from a building owner perspective, you have segments of folks, right? First cost is always going to be a player there. We like to push life cycle cost and true cost of ownership, of course, over the life cycle. I grew up in New York City when in terms of the HVAC equipment business. So nothing fits in New York when you have to replace it either, right? Because as we've moved on, regulations, refrigerants, gases, whatever, the equipment has to keep getting bigger and bigger. I think there has to be some type of inherent flexibility. I think we need to continue to move forward for the right reasons, to become more efficient, to get off of the fossil fuels. For all of those reasons, do we need to legislate that all? In some cases, we might need to be able to. What I get concerned with is if we legislate it, and we could easily legislate ourselves out of product that's now no longer available, doesn't fit the application, and you end up requiring far more intensive revisions or to the buildings that cause even larger issues, right? So I'm in the camp of legislate responsibly, but leave flexibility for the folks that really know what they're doing, which is generally our contractors and our consultants.
I'll add on to a couple of the comments I made to your question, that I think there's two sides to this. One, like I was saying earlier, is how can we as manufacturers, and I think this is something that our company spend a lot of time thinking about, is like, how do we enable you with a better product that you can decide for yourself, that it just makes sense for you when you take on the project and you leave the project, that you're not having to loop in the owner to buy into it, because they're going to realize, say, an ROI later, and whether or not they either have the sense, the capital, or whatever to realize that ROI, that really shouldn't be your business as a contractor. It'd be really nice if you had a product that you can make decisions for your own team's efficiency, and it's just a better product for you as an installer.
Yeah, I would throw out there too, there's lots of drivers out there, utility incentives. We haven't talked about that, but most states have some sort of utility incentives that can help you offset the cost. I mentioned 179D, which has some great tax benefits to put towards infrastructure improvements. But legislatively, this has been a tough topic for maybe it was 10, 15 years ago, it was a program called PACE, which allowed building owners to upgrade infrastructure and pay for it through their property taxes. Seemed like a no-brainer. Just couldn't get the traction that everybody thought it was going to get. Because again, it all comes down to money. Nobody wants to put up the money. If I'm going to sell this building in 5 years, can I limp it along? So at a minimum, that's where things like recommissioning and trying to optimize what you have as best you can is usually the lowest cost solution, but doesn't solve your long-term problem.
But I also think that we're doing a poor job as an industry, both enabling you and then maybe giving the tools so that most of the things that we're talking about legislation also make just good financial sense, right? But the tools in which to actually demonstrate that to your customer are very awkward and clumsy to use. Even big engineering firms aren't using simulation. They're using basically spreadsheets, licking their finger, putting it up in the air, and like doing an engineering project because it's too effortful, right? Like this should be like really easy for you to show your customer, hey, if you do X, it's a 5-year payback. Now there's another thing that comes behind that, which is maybe they don't have the capital or maybe they just, they don't believe you or whatever, right? So we need to do better to facilitate like the smaller contractors to be able to turn this into OpEx. And not capital expense everything for people. Because if you just said, hey, you're paying $100,000 a year in energy costs, I'll give it to you for 90, right? And this is what performance engineering is doing. But we need to somehow spread that out to the rest of the industry so that like we can make this more accessible to more people.
That was a good question. Anybody else have a question?
How do you see PAFAs and TFA affecting the build stage and things going on right now? Concern about PAFAs, forever chemicals.
PFAS.
Coming from, yeah, PFAS.
Sure,
Sorry,
Okay,
I'm saying it
PFAS.
wrong.
I was
Yeah.
confused as well.
Sorry, I was saying it wrong.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've had limited interaction with it, I would tell you. We do see it through our, so we also have a significant fire segment of our business. So things that are in the suppression industry around foams and such. So we've worked really diligently, I'll say, to get those out of the product categories. But couldn't comment extensively on it. Yeah.
Hi. I think Karen mentioned that there were certain rules that were being re-reviewed by the newer administration. Would you care to elaborate on kind of like what that cutoff point is? I think in a different session they were saying anything passed within 6 months is up for review. And then for the entire panel, which of the refrigerant regulations, maybe specifically within AIM or whatever you guys see coming out, whether it's through comments through your clients or yourselves as you dig through the rules, that you would find to be either a snake in the grass or the hardest for large corporations, enterprises to comply with?
Well, I'll start with the Congressional Review Act. It's actually 60 days, 60 congressional days before a new administration takes office. So that takes us back, again, it's not 60 calendar days, it's 60 congressional days to around August of 2024. So anything that was finalized in that time is up for a potential CRA action. So there have been several CRAs filed, and once a CRA is filed, then Congress has to act within 60 days, 60 calendar days, on whether to uphold that CRA, and if so, both houses have to vote on it, and it has to go to the president for signature. So that's how the CRA works. There's been a few in our industry that have been filed, one on motors, one on gas tankless products, and I think there's another one, and a couple other ones. So we'll see if they make it to the floor and if there is a vote taken on them. Some of those, again, there's 60 calendar days. Some have already been introduced, some are planned. So but the Congress is super busy with a lot of other things. So where these CRAs fall in the priority list will ultimately be dependent upon Majority Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson. So when they get those to the floor, the calendar may run out on some, or we may see some on the floor next week. So that's kind of how the CRA will work. Your other question?
Refrigerants.
The more challenging, sorry.
Oh, on the AIM Act,
Yeah, or really any of it.
Yeah, so the AIM Act, there has been a CRA filed on subsection H, which is the refrigerant management portion of that. So with that one, if the CRA is successful, then it could be concerning, because with AIM you had kind of three legs of the stool here, and if the CRA is successful, then that one leg is gone, and so we got to make sure there's enough gases available for our product. So I think if it's successful, then everyone's going to need to really work with the EPA to see what we do to make sure we have enough gas available for our products, and to meet we did ratify the Kigali Amendment, so we have some commitments that we need to make there, and so that is one of the levers we use to help meet those commitments. So it's exciting times, and there'll be all kinds of opportunities with that. So I think between DOE and EPA, there's going to be several things that are going to be looked at, and then we'll just have to. There's several options available. So and then there's also some other things that are pending before courts. So we're waiting on courts to decide on some things that have already been litigated out, and we're just kind of waiting on an answer. So.
Anybody else? All right. Thank you so much to our panelists.
Good job, everyone.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.